And that's something that happens when you begin to acknowledge that the energy of burnout is present. Judgment will meet you at the door. And judgment meets you at the door because it's what you have learned to do in those moments. It's what I had learned to do in those moments. Hola, mis Amores, and welcome to episode number 3 of my mini series on healing from burnout. Today, we're going to be talking about the cure. On episode 1, we talked about what is burnout and how I view burnout. In episode number 2, I share with you the signs of burnout and the causes of burnout. And in this episode, I want us to dive deeper into what is the cure for this? How do you get to a place where you are journeying you are journeying through burnout with ease and flow, and you can be in a position where it doesn't have to get to the burnout, right? Like you don't get to the point where you are experiencing the burnout. You can actually intercept that pattern earlier on so that you can show up to your life with joy and with ease and with flow without waiting until the moment of frustration and exhaustion to hit you. That's not a requirement to experiencing a life of joy. It is something that we choose to experience. It's not required of us. And I want to walk you through what can you do? How can you show up in those moments to support you and moving in the way that you desire? If we're meeting for the first time, hola, my name is Yenory Pouncil, and welcome to the Yenory Pouncil podcast, where I share love letters to my future self and to every single woman of the African diaspora that's learning to heal with joy so they can experience an overflow of ease and calm and inner peace in their lives. I've dedicated myself to this work for the past 14 years because I believe in the power of trusting your intuition. I believe in the power of trusting that voice of God that lives inside of you. And I've seen it transform my life over and over and over again. And I'm being called to serve in this way. I'm being called to share everything I've learned over the years and to do it with those of you that are ready. Because those of you that are ready are going to get quite a bit of this video today. And if that's you, let me know in the comments below because obviously I want to get to know you better. So we talked about burnout over the past two episodes so far. And we've talked about what is burnout. I share that I view burnout as a sign to redirect. I don't see it as something good or bad. I've talked about the number one cause of burnout, which really comes down to emotional burnout being at the heart of that. What causes emotional burnout being our ability to ignore how we're feeling and not hold space for how we're feeling. And that is where quite a bit of burnout materializes from. And today I want to dive deeper into what can you do in those moments? How can you show up to this energy so that you're not waiting until the moment you are exhausted to change and redirect so that you can do that earlier in the process? So there's a few things that you want to be aware of when it comes to addressing the energy of burnout real time. Some skills you want to have in place. And I'm going to focus on one of those skills because when you start with one thing, you can develop your consistency muscle with a deeper level of ease and flow. When you focus on one thing at a time, you are able to anchor yourself into a foundation that leads to overflow because you want to be in a position where you're pouring into yourself so that the overflow is what you give to other people. And most of us start with giving to other people, especially women, and then we pour into ourselves. And that's how we end up in the energy of burnout. That's how the energy of burnout materializes because it comes from our constant addiction. It is an addiction to give to others until we have no more. And then we start to give to ourselves versus shifting how we view this, which is looking at ourselves first and then pouring into others. When I experienced quite a bit of burnout energy in 2022, I didn't realize that was going on until the end of that year. And it took it took divine intervention for me to be in a place where not only did I see what was going on, I showed up to it differently. And when I began to see what was happening, I experienced quite a bit of judgment. I was judging myself very harshly because of the way I was showing up. Being someone that's a spiritual guide and dedicates her life to putting herself first and being connected to the voice of God within, I was experiencing a lot of judgment towards myself because I told myself, and I can hear those thoughts now as I'm telling you this, that I knew better. I was telling myself, you know better. You know better than to give everything to everybody without pouring into yourself. You know better than to make money your master. You know better than to show up in the world silencing yourself with the energy of people pleasing, with the energy of overthinking. You teach this. You literally have built a business, walking people through this process. What is going on with you that you're choosing to do this? And that language that I was experiencing, that energy I was in, is what happens when we get to that place where we have been avoiding our intuition and we start to see what's going on. We are met at the door with our ego. And my ego was the one that was doing all of that talking. My ego was the one that was coming for me basically and trying to drag me. And in that moment, I really felt uncomfortable because the ego was very loud. And a part of me believed that the ego was saying things that were true. I do know that it is important to put myself first. I do know that what's in the cup is for me. I just told you that a few seconds ago. And I do believe in the power of putting myself first. I teach it. I am talking to you about it right now. And I have built a business, a multi-six-figure business doing that. So those things that the ego was saying were true. And I was so focused listening to those parts of the story that I was allowing it to expand the energy of guilt, the energy of shame through judgment. And that's something that happens when you begin to acknowledge that the energy of burnout is present. Judgment will meet you at the door. And judgment meets you at the door because it's what you have learned to do in those moments. It's what I had learned to do in those moments. And what's important in those moments is to show up to the energy of judgment with the energy of compassion. I was on a call last night with the clients of the Self-Trust Society, the Self-Trust System Live, which is a mastery that I have. And I shared something with them that I want to share with you. I wonder, where did I write it down? I'll write it down on my iPad. Let me pull it up. Okay. Here goes. Here's what I share with them that I was like, ooh, this spoke to me. The compassion is what carries you through when the conditioning is the loudest. You may want to write that down. I wrote it down as soon as I said it. The compassion is what carries you through when the conditioning is the loudest. We have experienced conditioning on how we show up in every moment in our lives. Whether you're aware of this or not, whether you're conscious of it or not, you have experienced a level of conditioning. You've been taught to look at things a certain way. You've learned to look at things a certain way. And as you are evolving and growing and healing, you'll notice that some of the things that you've been taught are not serving you anymore. They're not in alignment anymore. And it's your responsibility to, number one, pay attention to what you've been conditioned to believe, take inventory of that, and then use that insight to decide whether you want to keep it or not. And in the real moment, in real time, choose to let these things go. Like, that is your responsibility. No one can do that for you. You got to be able to do that. And when you do that, especially if you're experiencing energy of burnout, you will find yourself facing the energy of judgment, because being in this path of healing and healing with joy, You are aware that there are some behaviors that aren't in alignment. And just because you're aware that those behaviors are in alignment, it doesn't mean that you're not going to show up to those behaviors. It's like people knowing that eating unhealthy foods won't help them be healthier, and they eat them anyway. You still have the ice cream for dinner, you still have the cookie for dinner, even though you know that in the long term, that's not going to serve your health. Knowing information doesn't equate to applying information. So when you are clear that that's the case, you become aware that it's important that you have a different level of intention and attention to the moments that are going to stretch you. And when you are looking to release the energy of burnout, judgment is going to show up because it's what you have learned, it's what you've been conditioned to is how you're being conditioned to show up in those moments. It's not a good or a bad thing. We tend to think it's a bad thing that we experience the energy of judgment. In reality, that's just teaching us what we have learned, and we can then choose to show up to that energy differently. It's our choice. And this is why compassion is so important. This is actually the thing that I anchor myself in those moments is compassion. This is why compassion is what carries you through when the conditioning is the loudest, because you can decide to give yourself the compassion. You can decide to give yourself the energy of grace. The cure to burnout, the cure to number one, experiencing the energy of burnout with ease and flow, because it's teaching you something. So you got to be able to look at it, is to nurture a heart of compassion. A heart of compassion. This can be very challenging for us as women leaders because we have been taught to not have that compassion. We've been taught that we got to be like the guys. We got to come with our masculine energy. We got to will our way through things because how else are we going to be respected? How else are we going to be taken seriously? We have been taught all these things. And when you are taught all these things, you show up with that energy in those moments. And not only do you show up with that energy in those moments to other people, you show up with that energy in those moments to yourself. So once you have spotted the energy of burnout, it's important that you anchor yourself in the energy of compassion in order to be able to release and suspend your judgment around the way you're showing up in your life so you can show up differently. And this is the key, whether you are picking it up at the end, once you have been in full blown out burnout mode for a year, like I was, or whether you're picking it up in the moment when you are spotting yourself saying, I'm going to send this email first and then I'm going to go eat. I'm going to have this meeting first and then I'm going to use the bathroom. In those moments, the energy of compassion is what's going to hold you and what's going to anchor you in, because the energy of judgment will show up. And how you show up in those moments is going to dictate how long you stay in the energy of burnout and how deep you go down that rabbit hole. Because when you are aware that, okay, I am now showing up out of alignment, you can choose to audit yourself or to criticize yourself. And when you audit yourself, you have the energy of compassion by your side. You are looking at how you're showing up. You're looking at how you're acting versus how you think you're acting. I talk to my clients a lot about this over at the Self-Trust Society. And I encourage them to look at how they're acting versus how they think that they're acting, because they're not always the same. And when you see that, you can determine how you desire to act. And most of us, when we experiencing the energy of burnout, we have a difficult time exiting that energy because we start to criticize ourselves. We start to focus on all the things that are wrong with us. We start to focus on all the ways we are not helping ourselves in the situation. And that energy is only going to materialize more of that energy. Anything that's rooted in the energy of judgment will only materialize more judgment. If you want to exit the energy of judgment, it's not the energy of judgment that's going to serve you, it's the energy of compassion and grace. Because then whatever materializes out of that energy will overflow compassion and grace. So as you are experiencing the energy of burnout and you're exiting that energy, whether it is after you've been in it for 5 days, 5 months, a year, or however long you've been in that state, it's the energy of compassion and grace that's going to be important for you to anchor and to amplify to get you out of that phase. Because once you give yourself that compassion and you give yourself that grace, then you can hold yourself accountable. Then you can look at what you can control. Then you can make small tweaks and tiny changes. And when you do that, you can shift out of that energy in a sustainable manner, a manner that's rooted in unconditional love versus a manner that's rooted in judgment, in criticism, in shame, and in guilt. Because those emotions are only going to keep you in that energy. And that's not the energy you desire for yourself. You desire to be in the energy of love. You desire to be in the energy of, I know I'm worthy. I know that I'm showing up out of alignment. And I know that that is so that I can show up in alignment. I know that that doesn't bring me joy. And it is so that I can learn what does bring me joy. I've stopped looking at these things as good and bad. I actually do not look at things from that lens anymore. Because when I see it from that binary lens, it limits what I can do. It limits how I can grow. It limits the range that I can experience in life. And I desired to experience the fullness of the human experience. I desired to experience the joy and the abundance and the overflow. And sometimes overflow is not just the things I want. There are going to be an overflow of things that I do not want. And in those moments, I'm being invited to see why. Why is this overflow in here? Do I desire this overflow? Can I shift to a different overflow? And how can I do that? Because life is about feeling good to me. Life is about feeling good and overflowing that goodness into others, amplifying that energy into others. I truly believe that when you're focused on feeling good, and feeling good doesn't mean avoiding what you don't like. It means feeling good about the process of changing the things you may not like as you're changing them. I am constantly in this state of discomfort. I am constantly in this state of pressure at times. And it's not the pressure that drains me. It is the discomfort that comes from knowing that I'm showing up to myself powerfully. And it's the discomfort that comes from knowing that I can release the old ways of thinking and old ways of being that I have been conditioned to believe and adopt new ones. I know how to do that. And because I am willing to do that, there's always a discomfort going on. And because I'm always growing. When you're growing, you're going to experience a baseline level of discomfort as part of your life, because that's what growth is. It takes you outside of your comfort zone. And to be in a position where you are interrupting the pattern of burnout, it requires that you hold that level of discomfort. And I'll talk more about what that looks like in the next video so that you can be clear on what integrating this looks like in your life. Right now, I want to focus on what's the cure. What's the thing that you want to focus on? And that's compassion and grace. That's being in a position where you can suspend your judgment. And when judgment shows up, you are willing to let that go and open yourself up to possibility of love and compassion for yourself and for others as they're also going through that process. Because what you give to you is what you give to other people. People can give you something that they don't give themselves. You can give something to others that you don't give yourself. So it's important that you're clear on that distinction so that you can show up accordingly, especially if you have the energy of being an empath at a deeper level. I believe that we all have empathic abilities. There are some of us that have chosen to go deeper into those abilities than others. It's like we can all run. Some people choose to run longer distances for longer periods of times than others. We can all do this if we choose to. Those of us that have chosen to cultivate our empathic abilities, we get really sensitive to this energy because we can feel people's energy. And it's important for us to be clear that the judgment that we may be feeling in that moment is not our own judgment. It may be judgment from other people. So we got to be aware of that so we can show up to that energy with that kindness and that compassion and that warmth for ourselves and our heart in those moments that feel uncomfortable. All right. Thank you for joining me today, Miss Amores. This was wonderful. In the next video, I'm going to dive deeper into what it takes to integrate these learnings. I'm going to go through what is beyond burnout recovery for you, so that you can take the lessons I've shared with you and implement them in your life in a sustainable manner, so that you can show up to this energy with love and compassion. Remember that compassion is what carries you through when conditioning gets the loudest. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of the Yenory Pouncil podcast, and I will see you next time. Hasta luego, mis amores.